The message came without ceremony, just a calendar invite dropped into my inbox at 7:58 a.m. Subject, executive briefing, location 27th floor East Conference Room. No explanation, no context. But after 28 years at Granwin and Chase, you learn to read between lines, and this line screamed finality. I passed by faces I knew well, some for over 2 decades, yet this morning they couldn't meet my eyes. Their nods were polite, evasive. I had mentored some of them through client crises and career stumbles. Now they pretended not to see me. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. The door opened to that familiar corridor lined with gray glass and crown molding I'd fought for during the 2008 renovation, back when we still cared about detail. Now even the hallways had a hollow ring. Inside the room, the seating arrangement said everything. Silas Breen, the firm's freshly anointed COO, sat flanked by HR's director, someone named Blythe I barely knew. Silas stood as I entered, buttoning his jacket with a smile so measured it felt like plastic. "Callista," he said, gesturing toward the seat across from him. "Thanks for coming on short notice." I sat without answering. "We'll be brief." He continued, folding his hands. "As part of our strategic realignment, the board has decided to eliminate certain legacy roles. Unfortunately, your position falls under that classification." I blinked once. Just like that, Silas tilted his head with mock sympathy. "It's not a reflection of your work. It's about direction, scale, efficiency. The future." Blythe slid a folder toward me like it was a menu. "Severance terms, non-compete clauses, exit checklist. We'll need your badge and company devices by noon," she said, her voice oddly cheerful. I stood slowly tucking the folder under my arm. I didn't ask questions, didn't beg. I walked out of the room without looking back, passing a junior associate waiting outside, feigning focus on their phone. My office door was already ajar. Inside, the bookshelves I'd curated over decades looked foreign. The air felt thinner. I packed in silence, wrapping the ceramic Paris mug in an old scarf, careful not to let anything clink too loud. I let the door of my apartment swing shut behind me and stood still for a moment, just listening. The usual hush of my top-floor unit in Tribeca felt different this time. Too quiet, too purposeful. No pings from the company Slack. No back-to-back pings from strategy decks waiting for review. No pings at all. I dropped the laptop bag on the kitchen counter and stood over it, arms resting on cool marble eyes, unfocused. My entire calendar had been erased before I even made it to the lobby downstairs. Meetings gone. Access revoked. I couldn't even log into the employee portal to see my own benefits summary. I turned toward the living room, toward the armchair I never had time to sit in, and dropped into it, letting the silence wrap around me. I stared at a shadow on the wall where the light from the Hudson bent through the windows. I had nowhere to be, no one to answer to. Then the first email arrived. Subject: "Is it true?" From Rima DuPont, EMEA branding lead, Vildon Tech. I opened it without thinking. Her message was short, rushed, maybe even typed in shock. "I heard you're no longer with GNC. Please tell me this is a mistake." Before I could answer, another message arrived, then another. By the time I stood to refill my water, there were 16 unread emails, all from clients. Real clients. Long-term clients. Some were alarmed, some confused. One from Devereaux Spirits said our call was scheduled with Callista. Who is Sebastian Robot, and why is he now leading our account? I didn't reply to any of them. I just watched as the notifications multiplied, lighting up the quiet. They weren't calling the company. They were calling me. By evening, my voicemail was full. 2 of the firm's legacy clients had requested immediate postponements. Another had paused a renewal contract pending clarity. I stood in the kitchen again, glass in hand, letting the phone screen fade to black. And then it rang an international number I knew by heart. The one that only called when the tide was shifting. I let the phone ring twice before silencing it. Benedict Chase. His name flashed across the screen, followed by the country code I hadn't seen in months. I watched the call expire without moving, then set the phone face down on the counter and stared at the curve of the wine glass in my hand. He didn't leave a message. He never did. The second call came 20 minutes later, then a third, and finally a text. Benedict Chase. Call me, now. I didn't. By morning, the news had caught up with him. Vildontech had suspended all upcoming campaigns. Devereux was exploring alternatives. Aurea had already signed a letter of intent with a competitor. I knew what he was thinking. This wasn't just bad optics. It was a bleed out. Quiet, quick, and absolutely traceable to the hour they'd walked me out the door. By noon, I had a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Maya Troop, former CMO of a firm we helped scale from seed to IPO. She'd heard I was on the market, and her voice, like everyone else's, brimmed with disbelief. They weren't just surprised I was gone. They were disturbed that it happened at all. That afternoon, Benedict finally stopped calling. Instead, he emailed. Short, strained. Subject: let's talk. I didn't authorize this. I need to know what happened. Please, when you're ready. It was the first time I'd ever seen him use the word please. I thought about replying. I even drafted a message. Then I closed the window and sat back in the chair. The damage wasn't mine to explain. Somewhere in Manhattan, Benedict was scrambling running postmortems with board members trying to unwind the optics spinning silos into strategy. But there were no more memos that could contain this. Clients were leaving because they trusted me, not a logo. And that kind of trust doesn't reappear in a PowerPoint deck. I knew he'd come in person next. He'd want to salvage what was left. But I also knew he wouldn't find it where he left it. The first offer came 2 days later, an encrypted PDF forwarded by a recruiter I hadn't worked with in over a decade. I opened it expecting a standard invitation to discuss future alignment. What I found instead was a fully developed role salary already doubled from what I'd been earning, and a note scribbled in the margin, "They want you. Not your resume. You." I didn't answer right away. By the end of the week, 3 more followed, all from firms I knew by reputation, tight-knit, global, calculated. Firms that usually required 6 rounds of vetting just to get an introductory meeting. This time, they skipped the courtship entirely. There were no vague platitudes about long-term value or culture fit, just numbers, autonomy, and 2-word messages. Name it. Every offer mentioned one thing in particular: my clients. Not former clients, mine. They weren't even pretending it was about titles or hierarchy. They wanted the weight I carried, the names I could bring, the credibility they couldn't fabricate. One of the recruiters, Lorraine Pell Sharp, as ever, put it plainly during our call. "You're not a candidate, Callista. You're a strategy." I let the words hang there. Because she was right. They weren't hiring me to join them. They were asking me to anchor something of their own. And I could feel it building momentum I hadn't even asked for, the kind that doesn't need permission. That night, I stood by the window with a stack of folders in my hands, each thicker than the last. Not one of them said return or repair. They all pointed forward, but I didn't move. Not yet. Because as flattering as the numbers were, none of these offers answered the question that had started to hum under my skin since the moment I'd been cut loose. If I was the thing they underestimated, what else had they failed to see? And if I had that kind of gravity, what would it look like if I pulled the center of power somewhere entirely new? The rooftop at Thorne & Marrow's Soho office was quieter than I expected. No photographers, no showboating, just raw wood tables, planters full of lavender, and a skyline that didn't need permission to dominate the room. I sat across from Cass Marrow, co-founder and strategist, a woman with a voice like velvet and a gaze like steel. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, so she said, folding her hands, "Let's talk about what you want." I didn't bring a resume. I didn't list metrics or awards. Instead, I slid a single-page brief across the table. Her eyes scanned it quickly, then again more slowly. "You want us to acquire your former employer's East Coast unit?" she asked. Brows lifted. "No," I said. I want you to acquire the asset they're too arrogant to realize they're losing. Not the brand, not the bureaucracy, the part that's bleeding value and still salvageable. She set the page down carefully. You want to lead integration. As a partner. Not an employee. I want full autonomy over client strategy, staffing, and cultural reset. No strings to their board. And I want this positioned as a restoration, not a hostile takeover. Cass leaned back, studying me. You're not interested in revenge? No, I said. I'm interested in impact. You know as well as I do, reputation doesn't pivot on logos. It pivots on trust. They broke it. I can get it back. She stayed quiet. A wind moved through the space, lifting the corner of the proposal. Would you be bringing clients? She asked finally. They're already circling. And your team, some of them are waiting. The ones who haven't quit yet. The ones who want to build something better. She picked up the paper again, tapping it once with a manicured nail. We'd need to move fast. I already have 2 private equity firms who'd co-finance the deal, I said, keeping my voice level. We won't need to go public. Cass smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough to tell me she hadn't expected to be impressed, and now she was recalibrating. She stood offering her hand. Let's make something worth staying for. And just like that, the first stone was set. The announcement came on a Monday morning. A short press release from Thorne & Marrow confirmed the acquisition of Granwin & Chase's East Coast operations, citing strategic integration to restore client confidence and cultural continuity. No names, no fireworks. But inside the firm, the impact was immediate. Silas Breen was gone before noon. His departure wasn't addressed directly, just a silent update to the leadership directory and an empty office with the blinds drawn. No farewell email. No forwarded calls. I arrived that afternoon, stepping through the glass doors I once called home. No badge this time, no assistant trailing behind me, just me and the knowledge that the air had shifted. People noticed. I caught the looks from staff in the lobby, the elevator, the hallway. Some stared outright. Others glanced quickly and looked away. There was no resentment in their faces, just confusion, recognition, and maybe something close to hope. My nameplate wasn't back on the door. It never would be. I wasn't here to pick up where I left off. I was here to redirect the current entirely. In the boardroom, a few senior partners waited in stiff silence. One of them, a man who hadn't looked me in the eye since the restructure, offered a quiet welcome back. I didn't correct him, but I didn't return the smile either. I opened the meeting with numbers. Client losses, churn rates, reputational decline. Then I laid out the next phase, stabilization through leadership accountability, client outreach, and cultural repair. No jargon, no synergy, just truth. When I finished, no one clapped. That wasn't the point. They listened. They took notes. They nodded when I said that silence had cost them more than inefficiency ever could. Benedict wasn't there. Not yet. But he would be soon. He'd come with questions, with confusion, maybe even with regret. And when he did, I'd be waiting not in a chair across the desk, but in the seat of power they had assumed I'd never occupy again. The company-wide meeting had been called under Benedict's name, though the room knew better than to expect clarity from him alone. The invitation said strategic alignment, which was just coded language for damage control. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited behind the frosted glass wall outside the main atrium, listening to the quiet murmur of staff finding seats, flipping notepads, adjusting their lanyards like armor. Benedict stood at the front sleeves, rolled voice steady but thinner than I remembered. We faced difficult months, he began. And with recent transitions, I know many of you are wondering where we go from here. I stepped into the room before he could finish the thought. Chairs shifted, heads turned. Someone actually gasped. He faltered. Callista will be joining us today to provide some insight. I walked to the front and turned toward the room. Not him. Let me be clear, I said. I'm not here to return as an employee. I'm not here to report to anyone. I'm here as the strategic partner overseeing integration under Thorn and Marrow. Silence. Some pens stopped moving. Horizon lost more than contracts. It lost trust, not just with clients, but within these walls. What comes next isn't a restructuring. It's a repair. I paused and looked at faces I hadn't seen in weeks. Faces that used to glance away. Now they were still waiting. There will be no layoffs, I continued. No fear. We're not here to cut, we're here to listen to rebuild. Culture is not a side project. It's the spine. For a moment, no one said anything. Then someone in the back clapped once. Tentative. Another joined. And then it surged, spontaneous. Not polite. Real. A release. The kind of sound that doesn't ask for permission. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just let the room breathe again for the first time in months. When the applause settled, I looked over at Benedict. His hands were at his sides, jaw tight. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. We both knew where the authority had landed. He asked to meet the next morning. Not through a formal request or a message, routed by legal, just a short email from his personal address with a single sentence, "Let's talk privately." I replied with a time and insisted it be in the shared executive suite, not his old corner office. He was already there when I walked in, standing behind the glass desk that no longer bore his name. The skyline behind him looked the same, but the man in front of it didn't. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing to a seat. I didn't sit. "Let's keep it brief." He nodded, folding his arms. "So this is it, then. You win." "It was never a game," I said. He lowered himself into the chair across from me and let out a slow breath. "They're saying I let an outsider dismantle my own firm." "You let someone else do it," I replied. "I just refused to clean up after it." His eyes flashed, but the fight didn't follow. Instead, he leaned forward. "You planned this." I responded, I said. "You were asleep while it burned." We sat in silence, the kind that only long history can stretch thin. Finally, I slid a folder across the desk. He didn't open it. "What is it?" he asked. "A consulting agreement," I said. "Non-executive. 1-year term. No decision-making power, no team. It's symbolic, keeps your name on a few legacy documents." He stared at it like it might stain his hands. "This is pity. It's mercy," I said. "You get to exit with something resembling dignity. Not everyone gets that." His fingers hovered over the folder. "Why not just cut me out? Because you're still a part of what this was. And I'm not interested in erasing that." He clicked his pen, once then signed without fanfare. "You're better at this than I ever was," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "No," I said, gathering the folder. "I just remembered what it used to mean. You forgot." And as I walked out, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The kind of finished that clears space. The new nameplate went up on a Monday morning without ceremony. Thorn, Marrow, Dre, no memo, no ribbon. Just 3 names set in brushed brass, aligned without ego. People stopped to look, some in disbelief, others with quiet satisfaction. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. Clients began coming back before we even sent outreach. Aurea reinstated their campaign portfolio within 72 hours of Silas's removal. Vildon re-signed their global expansion contract, and Devereux's CEO called me directly to say we were never buying services. We were buying you. The numbers started climbing, but that wasn't what shifted the air. What changed first was the rhythm, how people greeted each other in the halls again, how meetings felt less like defenses and more like collaborations. There was laughter in the copy room. Someone brought in fresh bagels and didn't send a calendar invite about it. I walked the floors every morning without a title pinned to my chest, just presence. I sat with junior strategists over cold brew, asked them what wasn't working, and actually listened. I didn't run town halls, I let teams run their own, and I showed up in the back, took notes, and stayed quiet unless asked. People noticed. And when they asked how I'd do things differently if I could start from scratch, I didn't hesitate. We already did, I told them. This is the scratch. I mentored 2 new division leads by spring, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I saw in them a version of myself I hadn't visited in years, curious, unguarded, unproven. Only now I wasn't watching from below. I was steady above, not pushing, just anchoring. No more urgent need to be right. No more pressure to justify my seat. Just impact. Quiet, earned, and shared. 6 months in, we were healthier than we'd been in a decade. Not because we'd grown fast, but because we'd grown deliberately. Not through control, but through clarity. And as I looked across the floor from the open mezzanine that used to belong to Benedict, I saw the truth he never could power doesn't reside in hierarchy. It lives in trust. And trust had finally come home. I read the final draft of the vision statement aloud in the quiet of my office, the late afternoon light bending through the floor-to-ceiling glass like a curtain drawn just for me. The phrasing had been refined, sharpened, argued over, but the last line remained untouched from the very first draft. We lead through relationships, not titles. Through trust, not fear. I let the words settle, then signed the bottom of the document. It would hang in the lobby next week beside the new mission statement and beneath the new name. But for me, it didn't need a plaque. It was already lived in the way meetings unfolded, in the way people stayed late, not out of obligation, but belief. It was there in the way no one looked over their shoulder anymore. I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair, exhaling, not relief, but clarity. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from stepping away, but from stepping into the thing you built with nothing but your spine and your memory. This had never been about payback. Not really. Revenge wants noise. Conviction is quieter. It builds where no one is looking. I thought about the night I was fired, how the door clicked shut behind me with no goodbye, how sterile everything felt as I wrapped 28 years of my life in a scarf and left without a sound. I didn't know then that being removed would become the opening note to something greater, something freer. Outside, the city buzzed below me. The same skyline I'd stared at with clenched teeth was now just part of the view, still sharp, still moving, but no longer intimidating, no longer looming, just there. Like me, I stood and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows that didn't scare me anymore. I rested my palm on the cool glass and didn't think about legacy or headlines or the applause I never asked for. I thought about the work we were doing, the people who stayed and the ones who came, because they believed in what we were becoming.